The first thing you want to do is create a project by clicking on this button. You can rename the project up here. The first thing you need to do is create a frame, which is basically a workspace that is going to contain our design. You can do this by clicking on the frame tool on the top left, or simply hitting F on your keyboard. You can see on the right, there are a few options. Let's start out with desktop. Now, let's create grids. We can use these grids as a guide when arranging or aligning our design elements. To do that, click on the frame, and then click on the plus sign next to Layout Grid. Change this from grid to columns. Now, change the column count to 12. Make sure it's centered. For the width and gutter, let's go with 75 and 16 respectively. Now let's create some rows to use as a guide. Click on the plus icon next to Layout Grid again. This time, select Rows. Let's go with a count of 2000 and center it. Set the height to 8 and gutter to 0. We can start by deciding the colors to use in our design. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using the colors from the clinic's logo. Let's import the logo by dragging and dropping it into the Figma window. You can resize elements by holding down Shift while dragging the corners. This maintains the scale of the elements when resizing. Now, let's create some circles to use as color references. Hold down Shift while creating your shape to get a perfect circle. Let's recolor this circle according to the logo. To do this, change the fill color. You can use the eyedropper tool to get the exact color of the logo. Duplicate elements by holding down Alt or Option while clicking and dragging it. We can now select a secondary color to use in the design. I would like to use another color in the design, so I'll go ahead and repeat the process. Now that I've decided which colors I'll be using, I can go ahead and save them to make it easier while designing later. To save a color, click on the element and click on the 4 dots icon in the Fill panel. Click on the plus icon. I'll go ahead and rename this color. Then click on Create Style. Repeat this process for the other colors. We can do the same thing for our fonts as well, to make the design process easier. To do this, create a text by clicking on the Text tool or hitting T on your keyboard. First, I'm going to make some adjustments to my font before saving it. You can do this in the Text panel on the right. Now to save it, click on the 4 dots icon in the Text panel and click on the plus icon. Rename the text style and click on Create Style. Now I'll repeat the process for other font styles to use throughout the design. So as you can see, I have all my font styles that I'll be using in the design later. Now let's begin by designing the navigation bar and the home page. First, we want to create a background for the home page. Use the rectangle tool to create a rectangle and resize it accordingly. Change the color of the rectangle. For this, I'm going to use the colors that I have saved earlier, which can be found under Libraries. I want to lock this rectangle so that it doesn't move around while I'm designing. To lock an element, click on it, or click on its layer, and then click on the lock icon on the layer. Now let's create the navigation bar. First, create a rectangle for the bar. I'm going to resize it and position it at the top of the frame so that it appears at the top of the website page. I want my navigation bar to be white, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. Now let's add the logo to the left of the navigation bar. Using the text tool, I'll create all the different navigation buttons. You can use the styles that you have previously created and saved. You can just duplicate the text for the other buttons. Now that you've got all the different buttons, let's make sure they are aligned. To do this, select all the elements and use the Align tool at the top right to align and distribute them evenly. Now let's begin with the home page. For this project, I want an image on the right and some white text on the left against a blue background. So first, I'm going to import my image and position it where I want. Always check the layer panel on the left and make sure your elements are in the frame. Make use of the layer panel to arrange your elements above or below each other. Now I would like to create a gradient, where the left is blue and the right is transparent so that it doesn't block the image. To do this, I'll first create a rectangle. Then, in the Fill option, click on the Gradient tool at the top to create a gradient. You can adjust the direction of the gradient by clicking and dragging the circles on the Gradient tool. Change and add colors as you please. If you need to hide the grids, hit Shift-G. Now that I'm happy with the placement of my gradient and image, I'll add in a headline and subheadline for the home page. Don't forget, you can use the text styles that you have saved earlier. For home pages, it's good to have a call to action button that users can click on. To create a button, I will first create a shape. I want this rectangle to be rounded. You can adjust the corner radius of the shape in the Properties panel on the right. Now, I'm going to add in the text for the button. I would like to add a drop shadow for the button to give it some depth and make it stand out. To add a drop shadow to elements, click the plus icon on the Effects panel and select Drop Shadow from the drop-down menu. You can adjust the settings by clicking on the sun icon next to the drop-down menu. I'm happy with my home page design. I'll move to the next section, the About page. To add another page, I'll first need to make my frame longer. You can easily do this by clicking and dragging the frame downward. Now, using all the tools that you've learned earlier, let's create the About page to introduce the clinic. An ideal About page should contain images, a headline, a brief description of the clinic, and a call to action button. Now we have a simple and comprehensive About page for the clinic. The next thing a clinic website should have is a Why Choose Us section. This sets them apart from competitors. Let's learn some new tools to design this part. I'll start by creating the background and adding the headline. For my design, I want to have icons in a circle and the text beside it. So, I'll use the ellipse tool to create the circle and then add the texts. Now, let's add some icons. To add icons in Figma, you can use plugins like Icon Duck, Hero Icons, Flat Icon, and more. To access plugins, click on this button on the toolbar. Search for your plugin of choice and click to launch it. In the plugin window, search for your icon and click to add it into your design. Resize it accordingly. Remember to always check the Layers panel to ensure your element is in the design frame. If the icon is in SVG format, you can change its color. Now, let's learn about constraints. Constraints ensure that your elements stay in their position when you resize your frame. Let's try setting constraints for this icon. Click on the icon, and then in the Properties panel, set the constraints to left and top. This way, when you resize the frame, the icon does not move. Apply this throughout your design. Now that I've added all my icons, I want to give the circles a bit of depth by adding some inner shadow. To do this, click on the circle and add an effect. In the drop-down menu, click on Inner Shadow. Adjust the settings as you please. I've applied the effect across my elements. Now, I would like to group these elements respectively. This makes it easier for me to move them around and align them. To group a set of elements, select all the elements, right-click, and select Group. I'll make sure that these are aligned the way I want them, using the Align tool. Just like that, we have our Why Choose Us section. We can now move on to the next part, which is the clinic's list of services. For the list of services, I would like to create cards for each service, containing icons and text. As usual, I'll first create a background and add the titles. I'll go ahead and create a card using the Rectangle tool. I would like to add some drop shadow, so let's do that like we learned earlier. Now that I'm happy with this, I'll duplicate it into 6 cards in total, since I'll be adding a list of 6 different services. I'll now add in my icons and texts. And that's it, you now have a page with a list of services. Using all the tools and techniques you learned earlier, let's create a simple section to display patient testimonials. I'd like to add left and right buttons on both sides of this rounded rectangle so that users can click on it to navigate to the next testimony. I'll do this using icons, as we learned previously. If you need to flip an element, you can right-click and select Flip Horizontal or Flip Vertical. We now have a complete testimonial section. Let's move on to the clinic's business information. For this part, include the Google Maps, address, contact number, and operating hours. Again, use the tools and techniques you learned earlier. Be as creative as possible by using a combination of icons, texts, effects, and design elements. For the Google Maps part, just use a screenshot of the map as a placeholder. This serves as a reference for the developer. We now have a section to display the clinic information. Another thing a clinic website will need is a contact form. This allows visitors to fill in their details, and the clinic can reach out to them based on the information provided. I'll first create the background and add in the titles. Now, for the form fields, I would like to use blank rectangles with outlines. To remove the fill from a shape, just click the minus icon next to the fill color option. You can add strokes by clicking on the plus sign in the strokes panel on the right. You can then make adjustments in the settings. I'll go ahead and create 4 fields for the name, contact number, email address, and a field to type a message. Don't forget to also add a submit button for the contact form. Again, use the techniques and tools you learned from creating the call to action button earlier for this. Now that you have all the necessary elements for a clinic's website, the last thing you want to do is to create a footer bar with a copyright notice. This is an essential part of most websites, as it warns that content from the website should not be copied. Using the rectangle tool, create a narrow bar at the bottom of your website design. Don't forget to resize the frame in a way that the footer bar sits right at the bottom. You can then add in your copyright notice using the text tool. And just like that, you now have a simple website design. You can preview the website by clicking on the preview button at the top right. This allows you to see how the finished website will look like. Be creative with all the tools you have learned, and create a website that is not only aesthetically beautiful, but also provides a good user experience. To share the project, click on the Share button at the top right. You can then share the project via email, or you can share the link and edit the link access in the pop-up window. Keep practicing by creating mock-up websites, and your work will gradually improve. Remember to use a design process that works for you, as each designer is unique. Thanks for watching.